Welcome to Executives at the Edge, the podcast from Amplify. Each episode features insights from the top network, cloud, and technology executives, giving you key takeaways to help you grow your revenue and bring solutions to market faster. I'm your host, Pascal Menezes. Join me as we explore thought-provoking perspectives from the leaders and changemakers propelling the AI-powered digital economy forward.
Welcome to this special Power Play episode of Executives at the Edge. In this episode, we're bringing together analyst perspectives to explore how AI is driving a new wave of network demand and the industry response. You'll hear from Bryan of TeleGeography on what's behind the growth in global WAN demand, Gorkem Yigit of Analysys Mason on how network as a service is emerging to meet these new requirements, and Caroline Chappell of CCSquared on the growing role of AI and automation in network operations. Together, these insights point to a shift from scaling infrastructure to enabling more intelligent, on-demand connectivity.
We have created a global WAN market size. The core business of providing network services is really the kind of the foundation of all of this. This is a model that I've created. It has lots and lots of assumptions. I've poured over the economic literature to try to figure out how many multinational enterprises there are of a certain size around the world. All of this stuff is hard to nail down. So we ran various versions of the model, right? So our total revenue ranges pretty widely, but the kind of median result we got was, I think, a very big number. You're right, about sort of 500 billion annually. Now, a lot of big estimates about the total global telecom market around like 2 trillion. So I think that makes a fair bit of sense. We had some model runs that were lower than that. But the key to it is that really, I think one thing that it undeniably demonstrates is that enterprise connectivity is still a really core central part of the global telecom business, why we're here talking, right?
So is that really what we're seeing? All over the world, we're seeing fiber going in everywhere. We're seeing fiber in the streets. Is that, AT&T's putting fiber everywhere? I think Verizon is too. And everybody's putting fiber. So is it because the market's so massive and their core business has been that for decades and decades that basically, does it become the toll bridge of the future? The more fiber I own, the more spectrum I own, the more toll I own?
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of putting it. I like that. And yeah, I mean, again, in the end, like a lot of what we end up talking about are those things further up the stack, and it's kind of more interesting to think about what does your NAS portal look like and that sort of thing. But yeah, in the end, all of these AI tools that are coming down the pike and all that have to have pipes to send the bits down, right? And you have to have a connection to a data center, and that data center has to be connected to all of the other data centers. So I think there's no doubt, as an analyst, people always ask me to sort of predict the future, right? Predicting the future is hard, and the more certain someone knows the future, the less likely I am to believe them. But I think one fairly certain bet, right, is that there's going to be quite a bit of development, like you say, in fiber markets. And you mentioned AT&T and Verizon, but we're seeing people developing fiber assets all around the world. That's submarine cable builds are ramping way up. Local access builds in all parts of the world are ramping way up. I think there's no doubt that underlay is very much on the minds of the providers, and that's exactly what this product that we've done, this model that we've created, is aimed to look into. We do this thing called the WAN Manager Survey, where we ask folks who are running large multinational networks kind of what trends they're seeing. So included in that are be like, what underlay services are you running? What bandwidths are you running those services at? Have you adopted SD-WAN? All these kinds of things, just basic metadata about what their networks look like. Then also, of course, a bunch of my colleagues at TeleGeography are looking after the infrastructure side. So how is the supply side, sort of developing? So I think we get to see that a little bit from both sides. But in answer directly to your question, I would say that, starting around the 2020s, obviously COVID pushed a lot of people off their, POTS, right? Or SIP trunking or whatever they had in place, right? Towards video, right? As in UCAS and all that kind of thing. So I think there's definitely a sort of increase in bandwidth demand just due to that, right? Obviously, compression is better, and these tools work very well on a variety of connections. But enterprises saw a lot of demand from that. And you're right, like previously, business tools, hadn't changed in their bandwidth demand that much, but that was a big booster. And then I think also before you get to AI, you have to include the change to cloud, like you were alluding to, right? That no longer are you connecting to an on-prem data center, and especially way back in the day, mainframes and things like this, right? But you've pushed all of this data and your apps and your dev, right, onto the cloud. So the hyperscalers are getting a lot of that, and that's increased bandwidth demand. To your point, yes, there's definitely massive bandwidth demand increases between data centers, and that's where we see the really big numbers that some people talk about, and that's where you are talking in 100 gig and 400 gig kind of waves and whatnot.
As demand grows, the industry is rethinking how connectivity is delivered. Here's Gorkem Yigit on how network as a service is evolving to keep up.
We finally started to see some convergence, on the definition of NAS. Finally, there's some common understanding, and of course, lots of credit, goes to Amplify, for all your efforts on that. And our definition and our view is very much aligned with yours at Amplify. So we are talking about wide area underlay and overlay connectivity services, and this is delivered as a service model. So programmable, automated, consumed on demand. So instead of the traditional multi-year long contracts and static networks, now we are talking about provisioning and managing network capacity on demand, and this is often through self-service portals, APIs, and this is coupled with additional like layer 3 and 7 services, security, optimization. So it's really like that cloud-like experience for networks, basically.
And so it's a very fascinating topic, because when we start to put all our assets under the NAS umbrella, it was still not quite clear what the NAS market would look like, and would people gravitate to NAS? Of course, we were thinking back then, of course, everything's going to be automated, so that was very natural. Connectivity would be on demand, elastic, so that was very typical. But and obviously, we were seeing the rise of SD-WAN overlays on top of underlays and so on. And obviously, clouds were helping. But there was still this kind of not sure if NAS is going to take off with all the telcos. But I think now with AI and the demands of AI, it really needs a NAS fabric. Do you have any thoughts on that? And do you have an idea of a market projection that you can give to the listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. Because and I agree with you. But also, the market, this NAS market is still, I would say, relatively early stage, but we are seeing, a strong trajectory for growth, because we recently published a forecast on the NAS market. And what we are seeing is we're estimating around $3.5 billion spending from enterprises, on NAS, and with a strong growth for over the next 5 years, and we're expecting that it's going to reach around $15 billion globally by the end of this period. And yes, if we put this into context, it is still represents only a small portion of the total enterprise connectivity services. We are looking at roughly 2-3%. But by 2029, it's going to quadruple. So it's going to be around 8 to 9% of all of this. And yes, the absolute value looks quite modest today. But I guess what really matters is the rate of change, because it's a very strong growth area, and this is one of the fastest growing segments in business networking. And I should also mention that these revenue figures and this overall NAS opportunity is not just exclusive to traditional carriers, because NAS market is actually sees lots of different players, and they're all vying for this the same prize. And we've got traditional carriers, there's SDCIs, co-location providers, some of the SD-WAN players, they are competing. So, and they all come with slightly different strength, different network reach, automation capabilities, but pretty much as I said in the definition, right? I mean, getting capturing a share in this programmable on-demand connectivity pie is the price for all these different players.
Now, looking at the market segments, let's take a multinational. Maybe multinationals we have on our enterprise leadership council quite a lot. I think 15 or 16 multinationals. I think from their point of view, they look at NAS and I want to buy transports, connectivity, on-demand, elastic capabilities, programmable, and things like that. So they don't really see, they do all their stuff on top, their cybersecurity and so on. So that's at the very top of the food chain, multinationals. But as I go downstream into larger enterprises, medium enterprises, small business, where's the NAS market really suited for? Because at the end of the day, is there a special sweet spot for the NAS market?
Yeah, we are seeing roughly 3 areas of growth in that. So in addition to what you described, first of all, it's cloud networking, and this is the part of this cloud native transformation of enterprises, and they need to connect these distributed applications and data that span different cloud environments, because multi-cloud is a real trend, and if anything, it is getting stronger with AI, and we can talk more about that later. So cloud and multi-cloud networking is definitely the one area of growth. And second is data center interconnect, and AI is playing a very big role here. Of course, all that AI traffic that needs to be carried across different data center and then locations, but also the automation that requires between the wholesale or the data center providers, and that is going to be shortening those provisioning cycles is important. And third is the ongoing transition from Ethernet MPLS to direct internet. So scalable, agile direct internet is another area, because NAS makes it particularly the cost efficient by letting that the scaling of bandwidth on demand instead of just paying for peak capacity. So all of these 3 areas is what's behind the growth of this the NAS market.
But scaling network as a service depends on automation. Here's Caroline Chappell on the role of AI in network operations.
Last week, I was at Capacity Europe in London. And what was amazing was that pretty much every panel I went to in that conference mentioned at some point automation and the need for much more autonomous operation of the networks. And what was remarkable is that normally, you get the discussion of automation is kind of confined to specific panels that are going to really look at, just address the people who are interested in managing and operating networks. This was across panels, didn't matter what topic they were on, that at some point automation came up in that in that panel. And what was driving that was really AI. The idea that AI is going to change networking and network services so much that automation was a prerequisite for being able to deal with that. And I thought that was very interesting. Also, from your point of view, the Amplify APIs and standards were seen by that community as absolutely key to that automation and that AI-driven automation. But if I may, I think, we've got to look at the value chain here. I think there's sort of 3 levels to me of automation. There's the automation of infrastructure, the software defining of infrastructure itself. and the application of AI sort of within that infrastructure. And then above that, I think there's a new layer that's kind of emerging, this kind of idea of a fabric network. How do you aggregate infrastructure and automate across infrastructures? Because the AI services of tomorrow are not going to be footprint constrained. If you look at some of the AI-driven consumer services like the metaverse or, even industrial AI, that they often sort of are services that are needed across operators, across infrastructures. And so the AI automation of that needs to be applied, against the fabric that's software defined across many different infrastructure footprints. And then above that, there's a services layer where the operators will be offering, cloud services or IoT, SIM management services, or whatever the higher value services are on top of the connectivity. So I think it's a fascinating kind of layer cake of different levels in the value chain, each potentially with different AI-driven automation requirements. We're going to get these different layers, and then, as you say, instead of APIs, which are very static, being the interfaces, it's going to be agents, as you say, being the interfaces between those layers, and the agents. And I think that the opportunity for in that kind of world for there to be far more dynamic dialing up of network infrastructure to create end-to-end services than we've ever seen before. So I think that really plays into your NAS concept. Because everything's got to become a service that is available to an agent. And it'll be the agent that's composing that together, as you say, with the models as the background, with the models as their pool of intelligence, if you like, telling them what to do. But I think it's a fascinating, different way of architecting. And as you say, natural language will then become there will be some sort of way in which the agents will communicate, and we will be able to communicate with them through natural language. So that those will become the abstract interfaces as opposed to APIs and code. I mean, that will all be underneath, but it will be abstracted away. It's very exciting because you do see the softwareization of the network and AI coming together with agentic AI. The fact, as you say, that when you softwareize the network, that means that there are APIs available. There's also the sort of all the unstructured information as well. All the wikis and the documentation and so on that's going to be available to these agents. Not just the APIs themselves, but they can consume so much data that a human would actually have to go out and look through a manual or whatever, or indeed put on a wiki, and then it's available for the agent to use as well. All the learning that engineers have about the network that's made available through wikis and so on. But it does beg the question to me as to how do you deal with legacy infrastructure if you don't have that API first strategy, if you haven't exposed your network in that way, and how far do you expose that network in? So. And I think different operators are at different levels of maturity in terms of actually making their infrastructure consumable by an agent. And of course, that's down to everything from their data management strategies to whether, in fact, how far they have actually softwareized their networks. So I think what's going to be fascinating to me to watch is when you see there are operators that are already very far along that journey, and others just beginning. And what's that going to do? Is that going to put clear blue water between those that can use agentic AI and really sort of steam ahead, and those whose infrastructure is legacy, stuck in the past, not softwareized?
Thank you for listening to Executives at the Edge, brought to you by Amplify. Be sure to follow, share, and leave a review. Catch every episode on your favorite platform or visit us at amplify.net.